Dear hoit everybody, and welcome my fellow uncouth Americans. I am Journalist of the Shining Star. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. School. 'Tis a prison for children. Let us talk a bit about the American educational system, its history. The earliest education for American children was homeschooling, where children would be taught the household religion, trade, and practical survival skills. Everything from foraging nature to forging iron. Many of these trades and average homestead chores were taught to both boys and girls. Of course, never knowing if their lives would last long enough to see adulthood, parents would uphold the knowledge to all their children in hopes that the next generation having better, longer survival, no matter what the gender. Sometimes it was a general master-student for apprenticeship outside of the family, such as a blacksmith or a seamstress. After so long of relying on animal and natural survival skills among the larger population that's been growing since the Clovis people, you cultureless swine, look it up. She says, not sure if she said Clovis correctly or Clovis. Reading and writing became more and more essential. Not to mention, after centuries of Europe's extreme religious politics, Puritans truly found it necessary to be able to read Bible scriptures and have the freedom to have a personal interpretation. So thus they began the first public schooling system around 1635 in Massachusetts. More so a school of linguistics, mainly Latin, basic arithmetic, and Bible studies. In the North, if you were a poor child, you were taught the most basic of basic, whereas the upper class children were taught the finer points of literature, poetry, and European curriculum. Excuse me. Depending on what state you grew up in also dictated the public school criteria. The more and more states that became through America, the more schools had to go to those different counties and systems and territories, and the criteria had to match each territory. If you lived in the city, you were taught sciences and progressive modernisms with French and, again, very staunch proper Latin. But if you lived in the rural or desolate areas, you learn how to trade in farming, ranching, animal care, lessons of nature, how to read the weather, fish, hunt. And this was all taught with a more common Latin dialect and Spanish, or you learned native languages so you could trade with the various peoples of Mexican Indian territories. The Mexican Indian territories at the time, before the Wild West, before the expansion, there still were trades between the whites, the Mexicans, and back then known as Indians, modern day Native Americans. Excuse me. Um, you could still trade and all that, and it was illegal to leave the forts along the coastline unless you had proper permission or you had valid reason to be outside the fort, such as a tradesman. So relax. When you hear me talk about this timeline, it is a very strange in-between of the beginning of America and the Wild West. So bear with me. In the South, children of means were sent away for a proper education, either abroad in Scotland or England, and even New England of Yankee territories. But the poorer Southerners were students of the land. They inhabited both lessons of farmers and of foresters. Believe me, there's a huge difference. Example, if a man or a woman were to gain medical knowledge, they would become known as the medicine woman or a witch doctor, and this would help against evil witch doctors or bad witches. and even treat the families of medical average reasons in their community. There was a combination of old world beliefs and new world education in sciences when it came to Appalachian and Southern knowledge, teachings, and education. I digress. Now, North or South, boys and girls had the same schools, but girls were taught basics for religious purposes and boys were taught in hopes for future businessmen, even though there were plenty of highly educated women at the time with their own achievements, such as the fabulous first Elizabeth Blackwell. She was the first woman to earn an American medical degree and opened the first full infirmary, whichever way you say it, for women and children in New York, along with her sister Marie. Please forgive me. I'm going to say this as best I can. Marie Zarzewska. Zarzewska. As well as releasing a book paving the way for women in the medical field in 1849. And even though it was more difficult for a person, especially women of color, to get a grand education, schools were not segregated till the 1890s, meaning they were equal before segregation, bringing us Rebecca Lee Crumpler in 1864. This was the first African-American woman with a medical degree, again, as examples that even though the system had white men in mind for success, everyone was still capable of taking advantage of this free country and gain successful and independent life for themselves. All teachers during these older times had full control, such as the criteria. They could politically and religiously brainwash students if they wanted to. They would never get checked. This was a very different time as far as adults just genuinely trusting each other when it came to propriety and publicity. There were also no resources to keep an educator balanced of their career. And their career is pretty much having a hand in raising young people. There were no HR departments or anything like that for people to complain about. And if your child stayed silent about things the teacher was doing, then it's not like a parent would ever know. And it would be very easy you see where I'm going with this. I digress. Educators would flat out give corporal punishment without parental permission. This was normal, even with the apprentice and student relationship in trade school or a trade school-like environment in older one-on-one education during colonial times. They beat each other. If the adults beat kids, it was the total norm. Even if a child did go to their parent and say, hey, the teacher beat me, sometimes the parent would ask, hey, what'd you do to earn it? It was that elaborate. I digress again, excuse me. And now, a lot of the times, these educators would zero in on poor children or the outcast and all that. So feel lucky that in today's world, parents, you can guide that path over the teacher, and you have a voice against the system when they've gone too far. It's a totally different world today. And teachers, this is an amazing time to teach. There's so much knowledge these days. You have everything that could ever be known in the palm of your hand. Instead of being that teacher with a textbook, reading out of the textbook, you have a world of knowledge in your hand of various different sides of one story. You have every point of view of knowledge. Now, you can either help kids sift through all these lessons, Or you can continue to bully the one or two lessons you personally fit into their young minds. Honestly, education is for the youth to have knowledge and to gain a great future. They are not these political pawns in some sick trending game you found on the interweb. Well, there you go. The origin of American education and my own personal rant on yesterday versus today. Cheers to American education. It's not perfect, but it's free. Snan.